I think we're back for the second review of the night. This is Philosophy Roulette 33. And yeah, we just did this recent work on physicalism, which was a fun review article. Went over a bunch of the things that people are saying about what is the physical, which is somewhat of a common topic nowadays. So if you want to actually go see kind of what the best things to say about it are, it might be worthwhile checking out. Just download it right now. You'll check it out in the check the show notes from the previous episode. But yeah, moving right along. If we see fiction and indeterminate identity, I mean, I might have tried to click on this and couldn't find it already. Fiction and indeterminate identity. Academia. Okay, that's that then. That was easy. If you are so inclined, and in the chat room, just type !paper and the link will come back up if you aren't live right now. And here we go. Let's download this. Alrighty, so fiction and indeterminate identity. Introduction. Everett 2005 argues against fictional realism, the view that there are fictional objects such as Wonder Woman and her lasso of truth. He relies on peculiar fictional stories. I'll focus here on Bartel, Schneider, and von Solodkoff's nursery rhyme that is based on one of Everett's stories. Bartel. There once was a man called Baru. There once was a man called Bara, but nobody knew if Bara was Baru or if they were actually two. So this is the whole problem with you got a doppelganger, but you're never seen the same place at the same time, so everyone just doesn't know if you are actually. It's like, has anyone ever seen what's it called? Guy who did Frodo and then Harry Potter in the same place? They look the same most of the time. Dan Ratcliffe and oh shucks, I'm sorry people, they deserve to have their names remembered. Like, I think they're okay people. You should like try to be nice and remember people's names, but it's hard to remember when you're doing stuff like this and reading stuff out loud without ever having read it before. You end up saying all the wrong things when you just gotta blow through reading all the neologisms and people's names, and I apologize to everybody whose name I've butchered and all the neologisms I've butchered. But continuing on with this. Fictional realists think there is a character Bara and a character Baru, but there is a puzzle. Are Bara and Baru distinct or identical characters? It's true in the fiction that they are either identical or distinct people, but the fiction leaves open which possibility obtains. Well, I'm not sure about Dan Radcliffe and the other guy either. What does it matter if it's in fiction or not? Let us suppose that Schneider and von Solodkoff did not settle their minds whether Baru and Bara are identical in the fiction. Everett thinks that fictional realists are committed to Baru and Bara being outside the fiction indeterminately identical characters. Well, I think Daniel Radcliffe and his doppelganger are indeterminately identical. After all, I've never seen them in the same place at the same time. I don't know. After all, it seems arbitrary to say that they are identical characters and arbitrary to say they are distinct characters. Everett, along with many others, think there cannot be indeterminate identity. He concludes that we should reject fictional realism. Okay, so this is the idea that you in like the real world, you have no indeterminate identity, but you can sort of do that in the fictional world, and so that's a deciding point for whether fiction could be real in the same way as they think the real is real. Wordward 2017 concedes that it is indeterminate whether Baru and Bara are identical characters. He argues that this result, contra Everett, is consistent with there being no indeterminate identity. Okay, yeah, and so the other horn would be to reject that concept of identity. He thinks there is mere indeterminate reference. I am sympathetic to Woodward's approach. Still, the approach is incomplete. Like many theorists in the literature on Everett's paper, Woodward does not discuss what exactly fictional characters are. This is a mistake. I will show that Woodward's approach is consistent with a version of Platonism about fictional characters, but inconsistent with a version about abstract creationism about fictional characters. The paper will proceed as follows. In section 2, I discuss Woodward's approach. In section 3, I argue that a version of Platonism about fictional characters leads not to indeterminate identity, but merely to indeterminate reference. In section 4, I argue that a version of abstract creationism leads to indeterminate identity. In section 5, I conclude that Everett's argument poses a more pressing problem for abstract creationism than for Platonism. The general lesson is that fictional realists should think more about the ontology of fictional characters in order to discern whether they are committed to indeterminate identity. Okay, let's see what this person has to say. What do we call this person? David Friedell. David Friedell says this stuff. Woodward. Woodward accepts that it is indeterminate whether Baru and Bara are identical characters. He denies, however, that there is indeterminate identity. A case of indeterminate identity is one in which a sentence of the form x is identical to y is indeterminately true, and b, the source of indeterminacy is not the term x or y. Here's an example that might help. Let baldy refer to whoever is the best bald basketball player. Suppose that LeBron James is determinately the best basketball player and indeterminately bald. Yeah, come on. Why hating on LeBron James? Well, okay, he has plenty of cred. You can hate on him as much as you want about him being bald. Anyway, what was it? The old joke from Aristotle. It's like, wisdom doesn't have to do with hair. So it's like, yeah. James is determinately the best basketball player and indeterminately bald. Hence, LeBron James is identical to Baldy is indeterminately true. This is not a case of indeterminate identity, however, since the source of indeterminacy is the name Baldy. It is indeterminate merely whether this name refers to LeBron James. I mean, the problem here is I'm not hating on bald people, but calling someone Baldy does seem to be a little insulting. Hey, Baldy. Contrast the case of Baldy LeBron James with the following example from Van Inwagen. Imagine that a person, Alpha, walks into a cabinet. Ouch. Excuse me. Something happens to Alpha that is so severe that it's indeterminate whether Alpha survives. So it's a major ouch. Subsequently, a person, Omega, exits the cabinet. It is indeterminate whether Alpha is Omega. Van Inwagen leaves it open what happens in the cabinet. You may fill in the details however you wish, given your own preferred account of personal identity. It could be that Alpha's psychological continuity becomes disrupted, or Alpha's body is affected in some way, or something altogether. This case is intuitively different from the Baldy. Like James' case, LeBron case, Alpha determinately refers to the person who walked into the cabinet. Omega determinately refers to the person who left the cabinet. So as long as we accept that Alpha is indeterminately identical to Omega, the source of the indeterminate seems not to be Alpha or Omega. Van Inwagen concludes that this case involves indeterminate identity. I mean, they didn't just switch the people, so it's just not somebody else. Okay, I don't know. Some theorists deny that even Alpha-Omega case involves indeterminate identity. I take no stand here. I aim to merely illustrate indeterminate identity by using the Alpha-Omega case as a potential example. I will consider other cases in section 4. Back to Frodo and Harry Potter. Back to Woodward. He thinks our concept of fictional character is indeterminate. He claims there are two related concepts, character 1 and character 2, and gives the following identity criteria. Character 1x is identical to character 1y if and only if it is true in the story from which they originate that they are identical. Character 2x is identical to character 2y if and only if it is not true in the story from which they originate that they are distinct. Okay. I mean, this is not true. Alright, well, let's keep going. Here is how Woodward would handle the ba tale. It is not true in ba tale that Baru and Bara are identical. Woodward would infer there are two character ones. It is also not true in the story that Baru and Bara are distinct. But Woodward would infer that there is one character two. It is indeterminate whether Baru and Bara are identical characters, because it's indeterminate whether Baru and Bara refer to two characters, or character ones, or single character two. Woodward would conclude that in this case it involves indeterminate reference, not indeterminate identity. Okay, so there's a question of what's going on here. It's how are the names being applied, Baru and Bara, to the object in the story, either there's one object X. So these characters here, the character 1 and character 2 are acting as quantifiers. There exists some one thing that is a character and is X. There exists some character 2 thing and is X. So that's basically, it's just depending on how you're, what does the X refer to. And so it's not a question of indeterminate identity, because it's whatever it is, but it's whether the names refer to distinct objects or the same object, so it's a question of reference. Okie dokie. Woodward's approach is attractive but incomplete. He is committed to there being three objects associated with the ba tale, such as indeterminate which of these objects Baru and Bara refer to. This is a substantive metaphysical conclusion. There being three objects. Is it accurate? Are there really three such objects? It is hard to know, even if we grant that fictional realism is true. As I will show, whether we should adopt Woodward's approach depends at least in part on what fictional characters are. I will consider two accounts of fictional characters, a Platonist proposal and an abstract creationist proposal. The first is consistent on Woodward's approach, but the second is not. Platonism. Platonists about fictional characters think characters are eternal abstract objects. Let us consider a representative version of Platonism on which a character is a set of all the properties that are true of the character in the fiction. On this proposal, Emma Woodhouse from Jane Austen's Emma is a set of properties including is handsome, is clever, is rich, and many more. Consider two properties I hereby define. Baru-ish. X is Baru-ish if and only if X is a man, such that X is named Baru, and 2, there is a man Y such that is named Bara, and nobody knows whether X, where X is presented under the guise Baru, is identical where Y is presented under the guise Bara. Bara-ish. X is Bara-ish if and only if a man such that 1, X is named Bara, 2, there is a man such that Y is named Baru, and nobody knows whether X, where X is presented under the guise Bara, is identical to Y, where Y is presented under the guise Baru. Now, consider three sets of properties: Baru-ish, Bara-ish, Baru-ish, Bara-ish. Let us suppose that the Platonist account of characters under consideration is correct. Then we may claim that Woodward is correct. It is indeterminate merely which of these objects Baru, Bara, and Bara refer to. It is indeterminate whether Baru refers to Baru-ish, Bara refers to Bara-ish, or B, Baru and Bara both refer to Baru-Bara-ish, or Baru-ish, Bara-ish. This is a case of indeterminate reference, not indeterminate identity. Okay. Yeah, so because you can quantify over differently, so one quantified here, one quantified there, you can quantify over both at the same time, and then you don't know which the actual object is that the name is supposed to pick out when you say this stuff. Abstract creationism. So far, so good. Now let us consider another story of fictional characters. Abstract creationism. Abstract creationists, Braun, Thompson, Zvolensky, think characters are abstract objects that authors create. Let us consider Evnine's hylomorphist version of abstract creationism. Evnine's metaphysics is not only used by abstract creationists, and many abstract creationists do not give many, many abstract is not the only. Evnine's metaphysics is not the only one used by abstract creationists, and many abstract creationists do not give many metaphysical details. Still, for the present purposes, Evnine's account is sufficiently representative example. Evnine thinks thinks of characters in similar ways of how he thinks of concrete artifacts such as statues and teapots. He thinks clay statues are constituted by but distinct from lumps of clay. Similarly, he thinks a fictional character is constituted by but distinct from properties that are true of the character in the fiction. He thinks that just as a sculptor creates a statue from a lump of clay, an author creates a fictional character from properties. So I guess it would be the idea the author has in their head, but that idea has more than they write down on the page. Whereas Platonists might identify the character Emma with a set of properties as handsome, as clever, as rich, Evelyn thinks Emma is constituted by but distinct from those properties. Jane Austen, while writing her novel, created Emma from these properties. So yeah, Jane Austen has a more complete version of the character, so that would be, and then the character was somehow developed out of whatever was in Jane Austen's mind at the time, or something to that effect. The key feature of Ev9's account for present purposes is the role of intention. He thinks someone must intend to create a character. Yes, what's in their head? What were they intending? He is not alone. For instance, Goodman claims that we actively and intentionally create individuals such as Captain Kirk in writing about them. Soames claims that characters, although abstract, are created with the special purpose of being depicted as or playing the role of something quite different. Ev9's account of fictional characters is appealing. Unlike Platonists, he preserves the view that authors create characters. He also gives a unified account of concrete and abstract artifacts. In his account, however, is inconsistent with Woodward's approach to Bataille. In order to see why, will help us to consider what Ev9 thinks about more familiar cases involving concrete artifacts. Consider 3 scenarios. Restoration. I take apart my watch in the morning with an intention to clean its parts. In the evening, I put it back together with all the parts, resulting in a watch that looks just like the watch in the morning. In doing so, I intend to restore the original watch. Now, did you do it at the exact? Do you have like a wind-up watch and you did the exact same time you took it apart, so it was actually right on time when you put it back together? That'd be cool. Creation. I take apart my watch in the morning. In the evening, I completely forget about the old watch and put together all the parts with the intention of create a watch. The resulting watch looks just like the watch from the morning. So you do the same thing, but you forget about the history. You lose the causal history somewhere during the day. Chaos. I take apart my watch in the morning. In the evening, I put back together all the parts, resulting in a watch that looks just like my watch in the morning. This time, however, my process is so sloppy and my intentions are so jumbled and unclear that it is indeterminate whether I intend to restore the original watch or create a new one. Okay, I just call this drunk. So you're sitting around in the morning, you do something with like the best intentions, you get drunk and you decide, oh, I'm going to go do that, and now you have no idea what you've done because you're jumbled and unclear. Very reasonable. Just as Ev9 thinks we must intend to create a fictional character in order to create one, he thinks we must intend to create a watch in order to create one. Accordingly, well, this is an interesting question. A lot of times we overachieve or underachieve. So let's just assume we're overachievers. So you do something, you don't really realize the full implications of the goodness of the thing that you've created, but you did create it. And so the idea that you didn't create the thing you created, but later you figured it out or whatever, and you created, be like, wow, I was smart that day. You don't always, I mean, I'd say that we never quite grasp the full implications of anything we ever do. And so I'm going to have a little, I think there's something to be disagreed with, that if you must intend to create a watch, you must create the specific thing. I mean, maybe there's leeway about when you create a watch exactly how watch-like or whatever it is, but I'm not exactly sure about the specificity of intention here. Whatever. I don't think it's going to matter, but this is just a question that popped in my head. Accordingly, he thinks that in restoration, I do not create a new watch. I restore the old one as intended. Excuse me. The watch in the evening is identical to the watch in the morning. He thinks that in creation, I successfully create a new watch as intended. So, because it has to do with your intentions and you completely forgot about the old intentions. So you've got new intentions, so it's a new watch. The watch in the evening is distinct from the original watch despite their similarities. You would think that in chaos, since it is indeterminate whether I intend to create a watch in the evening, it is indeterminate whether I create a new watch in the evening or restore the original watch. Call the watch in the morning watch 1 in the evening watch 2. It is indeterminate whether watch 1 is identical to watch 2. The source of indeterminacy is not merely watch 1 or watch 2. Watch 1 determinately refers to the watch in the morning. Watch 2 determinately refers to the watch in the evening. For F9, this is indeterminate identity. Okay, well, it's indeterminate because your intentions got indeterminate in some sense. In part 1, you have you intend determinately, and in the second one you have different intentions, and so you've got a different watch. And so the identity, even though we somehow think that the watch has a stable causal history because it's the same stuff in both 1 and 2, but because you are different and you are constituting the watch under the intentional theory, the watch identity somehow is not maintained because intentions matter in this story. F9 will likely accept Bottle also involves indeterminate identity. I will focus on a variant of Bottle that is closely analogous to chaos. This variant will more closely show that F9 is committed to indeterminately identical fictional characters. Consider this one-sentence story. Cocktail, Part 1. There was once a woman called Karu. Now consider its sequel. I mean, these should rhyme. There once was a woman called Karu, but no one knew if Kara was Karu, or if they were actually two. Okay. So there once was a woman, that's part 1 and part 2, and so up here there once was a woman called Karu, and then there once was a woman called Kara. Then after that, you don't know if the two were the same or different. Let us pretend I wrote the first story in the morning and its sequel in the evening. Let us pretend also that my writing process in the evening was so sloppy, that my intentions were so jumbled and unclear, that it is indeterminate whether I intended Kara and Karu to be the same character. That is, although I created the character in the morning, it is indeterminate whether I intended to create a new character in the evening. F9 would accept the following. In the morning I created a character Karu. In the evening I wrote a sequel about this character and a character Kara. Since it is indeterminate whether I intended to create a character in the evening, it is indeterminate whether I created a character in the evening or merely brought back the one from the morning, because I called it something different. I called her Kara instead. It is thereby indeterminate outside the fiction whether Kara is identical to Karu. The source of indeterminacy is not merely Kara and Karu. Karu determinately refers to the character of that name in part 1. Kara determinately refers to the character of that name in part 2. In these ways, Kara Tale Parts 1 and 2 is closely analogous to chaos. Just as F9 would accept that chaos involves indeterminate identity, he would accept that Ka Tale Parts 1 and 2 does too. F9's approach to Ka Tales Parts 1 and 2 is inconsistent with Woodward's approach. Woodward is committed to there being 3 relevant objects, 2 character 1s and 1 character 2. It is indeterminate merely which of these objects Kara and Karu refer to. F9 conversely would say that it is indeterminate how many relevant objects I created while writing Ka Tale Parts 1 and 2. It is indeterminate whether I brought into existence 1 or 2 relevant objects. Woodward might object that F9 should think instead that I created 3 artifacts, one that is constituted by Karuish, one that is constituted by Karaj, and one that is constituted by Karuish Karaj. It is indeterminate merely whether these artifacts are characters or where they are. Which of these artifacts Kara and Karu refer to? This objection, however, is ad hoc. No, it begs the question. I don't think it's ad hoc. Consider the analogous claim that during the evening of chaos 1. In the evening of chaos, I determinately create an artifact. Yeah, this is a. You can't be using. So they were using the font. Okay, the numeral, not the Roman numeral. Okay, my fault. The evening of chaos, I determinately create an artifact. It is indeterminate merely whether this artifact is a watch, in which case I did not restore the original watch, or not a watch, in the case I restored the original. It is indeterminate merely whether this artifact is a watch, in which case I think this should be switched. In which artifact is a watch, and did not restore the original, or is not a watch, in which case I restore the original. I think this should be switched. Am I just confused? This is implausible. What would the non-watch artifact be? It is indeterminate. Okay, so just because you because you were so drunk that evening and you fixed it, and then the fact that your intentions were you did it out of some miraculous luck, but of course your intentions were so scattered, that there's no way you were actually thinking of a watch while you're doing this, and so which you did not restore the watch because you couldn't have, because apparently on this intentional view, restoration requires intentionality. This is implausible. What would the non-watch artifact be? Much more plausible, at least given Ev9's account, is that in the evening of chaos is indeterminate whether I create anything at all. Likewise, it is much more plausible, at least given Ev9's account, that in the evening when I write Cocktail Part 2, it is indeterminate if I create anything at all, in addition to the story, of course. Some Platonists may deny that stories like Battail lead to indeterminate identity. Typically, Platonist proposals such as the one considered above accept a plenitude of objects. For Battail and similar stories, it is indeterminate merely which objects in the plenitude names like Bara and Baru refer to. Some abstract creationists lack this luxury. For Ev9, there is no plenitude of relevant objects in Cocktail Parts 1 and 2. It is indeterminate whether there are even two relevant objects. This indeterminacy leads to an indeterminate identity. I have not shown that all Platonists may avoid indeterminate identity, nor have I shown that all abstract creationists are committed to indeterminate identity. Still, the problem I've raised applies to more than Ev9. The problem arises at least for abstract creationists who think an author creates a character only if the author intends to create one. There is pressure on such theorists to accept that sometimes when an author indeterminately intends to create a character, as in the evening when I wrote Cocktail Part 2, it is thereby indeterminate how many artifacts exist in a way that leads to indeterminate identity. For these reasons, Everett's argument that fictional realism leads to indeterminate identity poses more a pressing problem for abstract creationism than for Platonism. How should abstract creationists respond? Some, including Ev9, will accept indeterminate identity, despite the bullet. Others might avoid indeterminate identity by insisting there are two or more relevant artifacts associated with stories like Cocktail Parts 1 and 2. This move would be ad hoc for Ev9, but perhaps better motivated on other abstract creationist proposals. Relatedly, some abstract creationists might follow Zvolensky and accept that authors sometimes intentionally create characters. This is kind of what I was saying earlier, that you don't 100% intend everything you're doing. Like, it's not possible. You might, I think it's impossible to actually precisely intend perfectly, except maybe for thinking of thinking. Like, okay, I'm thinking about thinking. That's all I did. But everything else, you're gonna have a hard time pinning down exactly all the consequences of like what you created. Like, did you mean to do the exact, like, break things in certain ways, bend things in that last little bit? The world's an uncertain place. So just because we have intentions, they're not gonna line up perfectly. The general lesson for fictional realists, and I have no idea. I'm talking about my just no real understanding of this stuff. It's not my area, but it just seems very strange to say that you have to intend exactly what's going to happen, and even if there's some leeway there, that doesn't make you right just because you intended something. But that's still your creation in some sense. But why should we always have to go back to exactly what you were thinking? I mean, it'd be a moral luck or an intentional luck thing that you, well, maybe that's my problem. We have to have some sort of concept of luck with this. Anyway, let me finish the last sentence. The general lesson for fictional realists of all kinds is that they should think more about the ontology of fictional characters in order to discern whether they are committed to indeterminate identity. Okay, sure. I'm not 100% certain on what the pain is in all of these things. Like, what sort of bullets are they exactly biting? Like, how bad is... I'm sure it's very bad on some theories to have indeterminate identity. I don't know exactly how painful that is, like, for what the Platonists would have to give up, what other people would have to give up. Yeah, so that's my ignorance about the topic, because clearly it matters to some people. The other thing is, of course, on the intentional case, what exactly are you intending? I don't know. I mean, sometimes I think of a character, let me think of Captain Kirk, as they said, but clearly my understanding of Captain Kirk is much less developed than a Star Trek fan's. I mean, I like Star Trek, but I don't know all the details of Captain Kirk. And so it's like, well, I intend something, you intend something. How do we line up our understanding of those things? And then we have, I mean, we're referring to, then we have to go back to the reference thing, not the intention thing. So, yeah. So this is, I guess, a nice, like, these are nice little arguments, self-contained, to show the positions here and the ways they fall out. I'm just gonna have to assume that they do what they say they do, because I don't know enough of the sufficient background. But yep. Thanks for watching. This will be up on YouTube eventually. Like I said, everything's gonna be down below. Need more information. So have a good night. Stay safe, folks, and hopefully should make some like philosophy about COVID-19 one of these days and make it fictional. Okay. Bye bye.